Hey everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Of course, for Stuart, it's evening for him on a Friday night. But thank you for joining us today. My name's Jamie Southern. I'm the Interim Executive Director at Bookmarks. If you are unfamiliar with Bookmarks, we are a literary arts nonprofit and independent bookstore located in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Our mission is to connect people in our community with important books that challenge, educate, and entertain. And Stuart's book definitely is entertaining. I hope you've had a chance to read it. If not, you're definitely going to want to after hearing him talk. I think for me, this is the best way to end a very crazy week in our country by enjoying an author talk. This is part of our Murder and Margaritas series. We really hope to have these again in person once it's safe to do so. We don't have another one this year, but we do have another mystery writer coming up on December 1st with Alexander McCall Smith. We're really excited about that, so be sure to check that out. We are recording this event, so if you have any kind of technical difficulties, if you have to step out early, don't worry, you can come back and watch the recording at any time. Please put any questions that you might have in the chat box, and Stuart will see those as he goes, and he can answer your questions during his talk. I'm going to introduce him, and then I'm going to go away, and we'll get started. So Stuart Turton is a freelance journalist who lives in London. His debut, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, was a bestseller and a favorite of several of my colleagues here at Bookmarks. His new book is a murder mystery set on the high seas in 1634. As a group of travelers sail from the East Indies to Amsterdam, a dark force haunts the ship. Unexplainable things continue to happen, and as people start turning up dead, the passengers and crew begin to wonder if a devil walks among them. I loved this book. I sped through it so quickly. I think it's so well done and yeah, just really fun. So I do hope that you get a chance to read it. I'm going to bring Stuart on now to tell you more about it. Thanks.
Hello! Hi, everybody. Wow, I'm now fully occupying our screen and I realise I look like a French Steve Jobs. Sorry about that. That wasn't my dress choice for this evening, but there it is. I'm Stuart Turton. So I wrote The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which was an incredibly trippy and twisty murder mystery novel. That was very Agatha Christie. On my take on Agatha Christie. And my second novel is this, The Devil in the Dark Water. That's a very beautiful cover. And this, I brought props. I know. This map, which goes inside of it. Ooh, that's in the inside cover. So just buy it alone for the map, please. As we said, it's this. If my first book was an Agatha Christie, this is more of a Sherlock Holmes story. So it's set in 1634. It's aboard a boat which is leaving from the East Indies, Batavia, as it was called then, in Jakarta, as we know it now, sailing all the way out to Amsterdam. And it was delivering spices and noble people. And these were ships that actually set sail. It's historically accurate. What isn't historically accurate is the bit when the boat leaves the port and it turns up that there might be a devil on board. And the devil starts doing loads of creepy, horrible, spooky stuff, which culminates in an impossible murder, because I love an impossible murder. And the shit to turn on itself as it wonders what this devil, the devil starts to make offers to people. It is very, very creepy. Thankfully, the world's greatest detective is on board the ship and he can solve it. He's very Sherlock Holmesian. He has that deductive ability. And his partner, Aaron Hayes, is on the ship as well. It's very Watson-style sidekick. He's a mercenary. He's been in lots of wars. He's scarred. He's brutal. He's a big unit. Unfortunately, my detective is in chains. He's been locked up and thrown into the brig on the ship, and you don't know why. You don't know what he's done. He doesn't know what he's done. So it's left to his Watson-style sidekick to take the mystery on in his stead and try and save the ship before the demon sinks it. That's the first 5 pages of the novel. And from that point, anyone who's read my debut knows where this thing. It starts and then it shoots you out of a cannon, and there's twists and there's turns. There's lots of characters, like a big ensemble cast, so there's lots of people to suspect and be suspicious of. Hopefully, in this novel, there's characters for you to fall in love with. To give you an idea. This is the cast list, so I know it's all reversed. I'm sorry about that, but all these names here. This is a manifest of passengers on the boat, and these are all principal characters. And there's more besides that. So most of them are listed on here as well. So you get to refer back. They're all kind of, I won't say historically accurate, but they do have roots in historical characters that came up during my research for the book. So we've got noblemen, noble ladies, Governor General, who's the guy who ran Batavia back in the day. He's on the boat, and he's based on a very real character. We've got my detective, who's obviously very Sherlock Holmes. We've got the Watson-style sidekick, but he's based on a real character. And I think what I should probably do is tell you a little bit, if you don't mind, a little bit about where this came from, because it came from a real life story. I'm a very stupid man. This is the first thing I should say right now. It's really important to know because it's going to inform the rest of the story. I always get lost. Everywhere I go, I get lost, and I travel a lot, so I'm always lost. And when I was 23, I was backpacking across Australia, and I'd intended to spend a year backpacking around Australia, which is not a small country, and then fly out of Perth, which is on the west coast of Australia, and go to Asia, which is just a short hop that way. I planned my flight 6 months in advance. I backpack around the country. I get everywhere I'm going. And then 3 days before I need to leave the country, I make my way to Perth with the last sort of like $20 that's in my pocket. I get there penniless, turn up at the airport to catch my flight, and it turns out that I am in the wrong city, that I booked my flight 6 months earlier from Darwin, which is about 5,000 miles north of me. It's an entirely wrong city. That would have been a problem. The bigger problem was that it wasn't even the right day, that I'd missed my flight. The flight had flown out the day before from the other city. So not only was I in the wrong city, it was also the wrong day. I'm an idiot. The very nice people at the airport put me on a standby flight and said, go away for 24 hours and come back to us. I had no money, so I went to the only free thing that I could find, which was the Maritime Museum in Perth, where I came across this real life story of the Batavia shipwreck. 1629, the Batavia, doing exactly what the ship is doing in my story, is on its way from Amsterdam. It's coming to Jakarta, to Batavia. It gets wrecked a month away from its destination. A month. It's been at sea for 8 months at this point. It's made it all the way there, no incident, and it gets wrecked a month away. The captain managed to get most of the passengers off the ship, onto some spit of island that's nearby, and then he sails off to get help. Incredibly heroic act. Celestial navigation, he's in a rowboat, he doesn't know where he is, these are uncharted waters, and somehow he manages to get himself to Jakarta and all the way back. Like, this is an incredible story, but it's not our story. Our story is what happens while he's away. And what happened while he was away was that he'd inadvertently left the survivors in the hands of a psychopath, probably history's first documented psychopath, who managed to kill 125 of the survivors in the 2 months it took the captain to get away and come back. 125 people slaughtered on these islands, which is horrific. And it's a really horrible story. It's a really, really brutal story. And you can imagine it kind of stuck with me. So 23 years old, I'm 40 now. I admit I look 70. I'm sorry about that. But I'm 40 and it stuck with me. So when I finished my first novel, which was it's a body hopping, time traveling murder mystery novel, which is basically an Agatha Christie. I didn't ever want to do that. Again, I was so broken. I didn't want to be the 8 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle guy or the 9 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle guy. I felt like I'd done that. I wanted to do something completely different. And this was the story that was waiting for me. But I really didn't want to write it straight up because I didn't want anyone to commit suicide 10 pages into my second book, which is what would have happened if I just told the true story because it's so horrible. So I kind of gutted it, and I took the boat and I took the voyage and I took the period and I stuffed it full of Sherlock Holmes adventures and twists and turns and all the stuff that I really like writing. That really entertains me and hopefully really entertains you guys. And I will say this, thank you tonight for joining. I know there's a lot going on in the world, which is very distracting, and we've all got one eye on it. Of course we have. So thank you for coming and joining me tonight and having a chat. this is escapism. This was always every book I write. People ask me what I want people to get out of my books, and it's just entertainment. That's all I want to. There's lots of stuff in there about the company, about capitalism, about the lives that were, tossed away on these boats. There's an interesting fact about these voyages back in this period when they were actually trading. Only 1 in 3 people who boarded one of these boats would ever come back. They would die either on the ship of some sort of shipboard accident, some sort of malady or disease. There'd be piracy, there'd be storms, they would be knocked off course, they would sink, or they would actually get to their destination and they would drink themselves to death, which is, pretty bad. So, or they would get malaria and they would die. So 1 in 3 people would never return once they got on these boats. And they only got on these boats because they were completely desperate. That was the only reason, because the company paid very little, the working conditions were terrible. If you were getting on one of these boats, you were running from something worse. So put it that way. So, it was just a really, really interesting period. So that's the real life story. That's some of the interesting stuff that happened. What else should I tell you? What else is interesting about books and being behind books? Sherlock Holmes. Let's talk about Sherlock Holmes just a minute, and then we'll get into some questions. The real life story. Oh, also, I did catch my flight. So I went to the Maritime Museum. I hung around for 24 hours without any money. I went and slept in the airport, and eventually somebody woke me up and put me on a plane, and I managed to get back home. So, happy ending for me, not the people on the boat. They all died. That was very bad. Sherlock Holmes. That's the second part of this, right? So I've got a boat. I need a story for the boat. Did you come over to it? Yes, we'll come to that. It's a really good question. I don't like Sherlock Holmes very much. That's just between us, right? Like we don't go into the world and tell anybody that, because I write mystery novels, and people will hang me if I say I don't like Sherlock Holmes very much. I love Agatha Christie. I love Poirot, and I love Miss Marple. I love all that kind of detection. I love Raymond Chandler novels, Philip Marlowe. I even love Sam Spade, Dashiell Hammett. All that sort of stuff is brilliant. Sherlock Holmes, I do not get on with. Sherlock Holmes is a tool. In England, we would call him a prick. I don't know if you have the same, I don't know, but he's a prick. And in all of his stories, he's only ever bothered. It's an intellectual puzzle. He'll only take it on if it intellectually challenges him. He's a very selfish kind of character. And I always hated that. But everyone swans around that world telling him that he's fantastic and it's amazing. And Watson lauds him all these stories. Watson, who is a doctor, he's a doctor. And he's a war doctor. He's a war hero who's come back. And he's a very clever man who built a very successful practice in the world of these stories. But he's always treated like a buffoon by Sherlock Holmes, as though he's got no value whatsoever. Inspector Lestrade, he runs at this point the foremost policing unit in all of the world. It's New Scotland Yard. Couldn't find a cat up a tree. So reading those stories, I was always baffled by these, and I was always interested in side characters because I never got any time, and I had no time for Sherlock Holmes, even though he was the protagonist. Which is why in this novel, my Sherlock Holmes style investigator is shoved off to one side. He's put in chains, accused of a crime. He's bottled up, and he's shoved off to one side, and I elevate the sidekicks. That's what I wanted to do with this. I wanted to make the sidekicks into the protagonists of the story and give them an incredibly difficult mystery and see how they rose to it. So there's not just Aaron solving this, who is ostensibly our protagonist. You've also got Sarah Vessel, who is a noble woman on board. She has an abusive husband, which is terrible, but she deals with that. Don't worry about that shit. She is driven and determined and wonderful. She's a brilliant character, and she wants to solve this mystery as well, and she finds ways to help solve this mystery despite her station, which in this time period would not have allowed her too much movement, too much freedom. She would have been locked away, but she finds a way around that. And while I'm sharing stories, I did not intend that. This is going to make me sound like a sociopath with, identity disorder. But when I plan my novels, I plan very meticulously. I know everything that's going to happen from the first page to the last page. Sarah came out of the blue. She was supposed to be a secondary character in the novel. She was just a suspect. And she somehow just barged her way into the novel. She kept demanding more of the story. And the more of the story I gave her, the more she wanted, and the more I got to know her, and the funnier she became, and the more capable she became. And she ended up driving the novel in a way that I never anticipated. And it was wonderful. It was such a wonderful writing experience. So I fell in love with her, and the writing arc of her is exactly the same as her story arc within the novel. As you read her, as you see her develop, as you see her confidence grow, that is what she demanded of me writing her. That's what happened during the writing process. So that's just a little thing between us. Hopefully, you read the novel and you'll see that. And that's about it, I think, for sort of background things. I have some fun sailor facts. If anybody wants to hear some fun sailor facts when we're doing the questions, please ask me for fun sailor facts from the period. Let's call it there and see if there's any questions in the chat, which for me is just over here. So when I dart over there, that's what I'm going to be doing. So just a little minute. Sorry to be rude. Please throw some questions up because I love answering questions, and I don't get to. The best thing about being an author for me is that I get to go out and meet you guys. I get to go to shops and we chat, and hopefully at some point we go for a beer. But can't do that. Pandemic. So I'm trapped in my bedroom, which is exactly the same point where I wrote the damn book. So I've not got to go anywhere. There's been no joy in this. So please ask questions so we can have a chat because I really, really do like that. Let's have a look. Da-ba-da. I love this cast of characters. They're also real, and I definitely suspected all of them at one time. Oh, thank you very much. I am going to say my worst habit, I'm going to turn that to a question because my worst habit when I'm writing is that I love my characters to pieces. And I'm a very plotty writer, so I like to have a twist or a turn on almost every page. I like to mess with the tropes of the genre because I know the genre inside out. As I said, I read all the Agatha Christie's, I read all the Sherlock Holmes, I love all the American noir. So when I delve into these genres, I know them inside and out. So as I write, I try to be a reader as well. I try to imagine what I'm going to expect, what one of you guys will expect as you're reading the novel, and then I try and give you the trope that you're expecting and then send you that way. I try to use the trope as the red herring or use you guys as the red herring. That's great fun. That's really, really good fun. The characters are the same thing. I love filling characters out and getting to know them, exploring them. So I don't, even though I plot my novels extensively, I don't actually plan my characters very much. I get to know them in the writing. And what happens there is that sometimes the characters, like Sarah, like the story I just told you, do things that I don't expect. And then I've got to adjust the plan kind of around them or give them more to do and take away from someone else and readjust. So I write novels in this really crazy sort of juggling way where it's very, very planned, but also very, very sort of like free and loose because of the characters. I think it's possibly the worst of both of those methods. So if you're a writer, please don't replicate it because it's terrible. But yeah, that's why hopefully the characters feel quite real because they come from historical research. I fell in love with them. I don't ever want a character who turns up on the page and just feels like a silhouette. It just feels like they're there to fulfill a plot function. I want my characters to feel like actual people. And after, my first novel was called The Seven Half Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I hope you read that because it nearly killed me to write it. So it'd be cool if people read it. Everyone in that book is awful and purposely awful, and that was intentional. When I was writing this book, I wanted all my characters to feel like, not all of them, but I wanted most of them to be people you'd go to the pub with and have a nice time with, and you feel like you could have a good time and enjoy their company. And they laugh a lot and they joke with each other and they take the piss out of each other. There's a lot of human interaction between them, and that was very purposeful. So hopefully when you board the Sardam, even though it's terrifying, you have quite a nice time with these characters because I worked really hard on them. And I actually quite like a lot of them, which is very strange. Valencia, Stuart, you don't look 70. Oh, thanks very much, mate. I didn't have to read that out. That's not a question, but I'm just taking the compliment where I can. I have a 2-year-old daughter. There's not a lot of compliments in my life anymore. There's a lot of pointing and demanding, and my daughter told me I'm fat. She's learned the word fat. So he does favour Steve Jobs. Oh, also nice. Did the Dutch East India Company have a gentleman 17? Oh, yeah. So, the Gentleman 17 feel like they are, people have not read the book, the Gentleman 17 are a shadowy cabal of people who run the Dutch East India Company, or the United East India Company, as it would have been at that time. And this is the company that is the reason this ship is set in sail. This ship is delivering spices to the Dutch East India Company, who will then sell it. Back in the day, the Dutch East India Company owned everything. It had outposts all across the East Indies. It had a bigger fleet than most nations. It had a bigger army than most nations. It had its own currency. It had its own stamps. It was the first publicly traded company in the world. So we would recognize it. You know, if we went to work for this company, somehow we passed, thrown back in time, we would not understand any of the world around us. It would seem too brutal. It would seem too vague. We'd be dead in 10 seconds of disease or crime or something. But we would understand the company because its levels, the way executives worked, the way people reported to other people, the way it was traded, the fact that it's all about making profit and nothing else, we would have recognized it. And in charge of the company were the Gentlemen 17. I did not make these people up. They're an historical feature. They did a lot of the things that they say they did in the book, which is to say they met, they were so suspicious of being assassinated that they met in secret at random places around the city, and they would turn up in disguises. Very strange bunch of guys. Incredibly rich. We would recognize them as a board of directors now, but incredibly rich. Again, richer than most kings, more power than most kings, and only interested in making money. That was their only concern. They didn't care about the lives that were lost on these ships. They only cared about the ships themselves and what they carried. And to the point where when the ship was lost at sea, when it sank, they would tally the cargo loss and the cost of the ship loss, but not the cost of the crew who were lost, because they weren't worth anything. There was always more desperate people willing to get on the ship. So yeah, they did exist, and they were utter bastards. What else have we got? Hercule Poirot rocks. Yes, he does, my friend. Anyone who drinks herbal tisane tea and then goes out to solve a mystery is pretty brilliant. Love Chandler Christie in American Noir. Excellent taste. When thinking of Pip, several of the characters mentioned his previous cases. Did you think through what some of his cases would look? Yeah. So throughout the book, my fun idea for this, which has kind of slightly infuriated some people weirdly, was that I wanted this to feel like, it's very strange. I wanted this book to feel like the final adventure, close to the final adventure of Aaron Hayes and Samuel Pepys. And I wanted to feel like this was a series of books, almost like the case books of Sherlock Holmes, like there'd been 50 of these before and you were reading the last one. So all the way through, they're referring to cases they've been on before and events that have like, and I wanted them to feel like they've been through this event, so they're bonded and they have that close connection. But I obviously, those books don't exist, except they do. They just haven't been published. So when I was trying to write this book, I had to learn how to do the Sherlock Holmes method of deduction, which is incredibly hard actually, because a lot of it's sleight of hand. Which is to say that some of his deductive leaps have to sound like they make sense, but they don't actually make any sense at all in the real world. They wouldn't possibly work. I had to learn how to do it. So what I did was I wrote a bunch of short stories about these characters having adventures, and they were very Sherlock Holmes in style. And there's 7 of them, and they all have very Sherlock Holmes titles. So one's called like The Mystery of the Vanishing Church, and The Case of the Twice Dead Wife, all these sorts of things, very titles, and incredibly hooky hooks, impossible mysteries, and then Sherlock Holmes resolutions. So there's 7 of them. And my initial idea was that I would write them, learn how to do this, and then I would somehow find a way to put them into the book, because otherwise they'd be wasted words. But then when I came to write the book, they just didn't fit. There was nowhere to put them in. So they never got into the book, which is a bit of a shame. So now they're floating around. One of them turned up in a special edition in the UK. Another one's going to go in an anthology of other stories somewhere else. I think the third one is earmarked for something else. So these short stories are going to float around the world, and you'll be able to collect them like Pokemon.
We lost your sound there for a bit, and I can't seem to turn it back on for you. Will it let you unmute your microphone from your side? Oh, okay, gotcha. I'm having so much fun listening to this. I hope everyone else is too. I'm really excited about the short stories. If you've read the book, you know that the ending leaves it open definitely for some more adventures. So that's really fun to know that we haven't heard all from Errant and Pips. This is the fun of technology. Looks like your mic is still off.
Hello, hello.
There we go. We can hear you now.
Am I back now?
Yes, great. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, that is entirely my fault. I trusted in technology far too much, and this is what it gets you. And now you get to see me wearing a call center headset. So like I'm going to take your orders on a catalog. So this is even better. What on earth was I talking about before I rudely went away on you guys? I'll go back to questions, and then if I was halfway through a story, my mind is filled with nonsense. I'm so sorry. Let's see. Yes to fun sailor facts. Okay, let's pepper this with fun sailor facts. My first, and this is in the story, was that eventually there was no fresh water, or there was fresh water on one of these boats, but it was for drinking, not washing yourself and not washing your clothes. And as anybody who's ever been in the ocean and just left that on the skin knows, it gets very itchy very quickly. So sailors didn't like doing it. So what they did instead, and this is true, is they washed their clothes in urine. That's right, their own piss, rather than seawater, because it was more pleasant. The odor was more pleasant than the itching, was the way they looked at it. Why did they wash their clothes? Because they were infested with bugs. So their clothing would have been filled with small parasitic insects, just disgusting, horrible, horrible stuff. There's a great story about one of these ships, East Indiaman 1629, 1630 or something like that. And the captain got so sick of the amount of cockroaches on the ship that he offered a shot of whiskey to every man who brought them like something like 1,000 cockroaches. The crew would get an extra shot of whiskey, and he ended up with 27,000 dead cockroaches. So there's a fun cockroach fact for you. Life in this time would not have been very pleasant. We were talking about the cases. Yeah, so there's all those cases, short stories floating around, and I will try to wedge them wherever I can. And if not, I'll one day get a website built and I will put them all up there because they're actually quite good fun. I really like writing them, but they're very, very derivative. They're very Sherlock Holmes. There's no spin, there's no twist. They just exactly could have been 7 extra cases in the Sherlock Holmes case, but with just different names. Karen Glass, hello Karen Glass. Your work also seems to have a bit of the mythical and good versus evil aspect. Where does that influence come from? I was raised Roman Catholic. I am now an atheist. I'm a practicing atheist. But I was Roman Catholic growing up, and all that stuff was wedged into my brain. The iconography, the Bible, like I know the Bible back to front, inside out. It's part of my head canon, along with Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie and Groundhog Day and all the films and everything I watch. The Bible's part of that. So, and it's a I don't know if everyone's read it, but it's just whether you believe in it or not. It's a great story with great imagery, and it's about things that just resonate now. I mean, a lot of it's terribly written, but it could do with a good edit. But it's got a lot that we'd recognise as good storytelling. So I think I tend to sort of just, when I start writing, I tend to fall back on things that, again, were formative to me growing up. So that is things like I read Stephen King as a teenager. So Stephen King, I read a lot of Gothic horror. I read a lot of like Agatha Christie murder mysteries, and the Bible, the good versus evil, all of that stuff. But the fact that good versus evil is, as you put it, a mythical fight. There are greater forces at work, and it isn't just a matter. I think my books generally come down to the idea that at the end of the day, good versus evil is a choice. It's what we decide to be as people, but there's always outside influences on that. So it's a really vague and woolly answer to that question, but I think that's probably where it comes from. It's also just good for character arcs, right? Good versus evil is all we all implicitly understand, but can take your story in multiple different ways. So I do like playing with it. Can you talk about Old Tom? Is he based on a character from real mythology religion? Yeah. So he is. Old Tom is my demon. He gets named after about 20, 25 pages, so this isn't too much of a spoiler, but Old Tom was actually based on a demon called Astaroth. Astaroth the Inquisitor, if you have an interest in looking it up. Astaroth the Inquisitor, his deal was, this is again in the Middle Age when he was identified, he was a very real demon, or people thought he was very real, and he got to you by asking questions, which is perfect for a mystery novel because it's what detectives do. But he would get you to unveil in front of people who didn't want to hear this truth your deepest, darkest truths, like the hurts that you'd visited upon others, right? So he's a demon investigator, basically, and I love that. I love playing with that. So I took a lot from him because I liked the imagery. I didn't keep the name. I changed the name to Old Tom because it didn't feel like, back in the day, the way information would have been handed would have been Chinese whisper style. It would have been the village over. Somebody would come from that village to your village carrying a story. Then they would pass on to the next village, next village, and the next village. By the time it got to you, Astaroth would have been something else. His real name, or what was perceived to be his real name, would not have been the information you got, and his form would have been twisted, and what he did would have been twisted. I quite like the idea of Old Tom as a name. It feels unthreatening at first glance, and then you keep looking at it and you keep piling things into it. You keep piling superstition and fear, and all of a sudden Old Tom gets quite a sinister category to it. So yeah, that's kind of what happened there. I should also talk about, in 1634, which is when this novel was set, people believed in demons. They, not even like passingly, not vaguely, they believed that demons were at work in their life and they were something that had to be avoided. King James, who was like, he would have been a scholar and he was studious and he would have been educated. He wrote a thing called the Demonologica, and the Demonologica was a Bible for demons, but not about worship, but about protection for humanity. It listed all the demons at work in the world, who they reported to in the hierarchies of hell, what the position was in hell, how they got to you, how you could defend yourself against them. There's amazing illustrations in this book of these various demons and their forms and how they looked, and they're very twisted. There's a lot of imagination that went into this. And it's one of like 3 or 4 competing volumes on this subject that people genuinely believe this. And obviously they did, because they didn't understand the world around them. All they knew was that occasionally all their crops would die for reasons they didn't possibly understand, and then very likely they would die or their children would die of starvation. They needed these things to believe, and they needed something to blame. It's who we are. So it was very much based in the superstitions, and this is kind of why the superstition is such a big part of this book, and the occult and demons and Old Tom, because this period was rife with it, but it's also so much fun to write. Which brings me on to another question here. Please tell us about the demon hunting course you went on, from Teresa. This was very strange. I genuinely did a demon hunting course with a dude in the US when I was over there last time for 7 Deaths, and I was talking to, I'd gone out with some people in Georgia, I think, and I was just chatting. They were asking what my next book was about, and I'm saying it's about demons, and they're like, "Oh, we know a guy who hunts demons." I was like, "This seems like nonsense." Like, no, honestly, straight up, he generally does this. So like, if your cat is possessed or your cows or whatever it was, this guy will sort it out for you. He knows how to spot demons. So I stayed there for an extra day, and I went the next morning. Oh no, I didn't. Sorry, I went and met him the first thing the next morning. So I was flying out in the afternoon, and I went and did 3 hours with this guy, and he took me all around, and he taught me how to spot demons in real life and what to do to combat them. Basically, it was like call the police, but not call the police, call him. It was like he is the police force of the demon world. Like he will come and sort this out for you. But basically, it's erratic behavior. It's just in case you're wondering, in case you're looking to protect yourself from demons in your real life, and who isn't, you should be looking for erratic behavior. You should be looking for impossible feats, because demons are proud and grandiose. Talking in tongues is usually apparently quite common. What's the other thing? Oh, like changes in the natural world was, I think, how he described it to me. So like things dying or things changing their elemental properties. It was very strange. He was a weirdly nice guy who was obviously crazy. But I had a very interesting morning with him, and he will probably turn up in a book at some point. Will there be more adventures from Aaron and Pips? You did leave it open for a sequel. Oh, but I didn't. I always get accused of this. I got accused of this with 7.5 Deaths. I got accused of this with, I use accused in a very fond and loose term, and I got accused of this with this book, and it's not a sequel. I'm not sequel baiting or prequel. I will never ever write a sequel to any book I ever write. And not because I have any problems with sequels, but because I am an old man with too many ideas in my head, and I need to get to them before I die, is my principal concern. So I can't spend too much time in the worlds that I've created. And also, I like surprises. I like each of my novels will probably be a murder mystery of some description. I quite like the idea that the genre of it is as much a surprise to the reader in terms of its setting and who these characters are going to be and how I'm going to mess around with the murder mystery genre. I like the idea that that's as surprising to you as the revelation of who the murder is and how it was done. So I always want to be just changing direction on you and sort of like coming back on myself and altering things. I think that's just quite good fun for everybody. And if I write a sequel, then you kind of know 2/3 of what I'm doing. You've already met my characters. And the only thing I can possibly do there then is upset you by doing something terrible to a character you like, or turning them into a bad guy when they probably don't deserve it, or trying to bring in a new cast of characters, but then then I've got too many characters because I've got the old characters we've got to keep around. I just can't see a way of doing it in an interesting way. So I will probably never write a sequel to anything. I'm just going to keep moving worlds. But what I do like to do is when I finish the book, I want you always to feel like the book was these people were there before you ever got there. They don't exist for your reading pleasure. They were having their lives before you got there, and they will carry on after you leave the book. They've got a world and you just got a glimpse of it, and then they'll just move on. So I don't leave my books open because of sequels. I leave them open because I want you to think that they've got more adventures ahead of them. They've got more life ahead of them, whatever that may be, even if it's just to go to the supermarket tomorrow. Right, some dickhead here called Stuart Turton is asking, can everyone hear him? So let's just all assume we can all hear him, okay? God, crying out for attention. What a tool. Don't sign me up to be a sailor. How historically accurate is the Sardam? Is it constructed how a ship from that time would have been period in the smugglers? Yeah. So the ship that all of this takes place on, the Sardam, is an exact recreation of a 1634 East Indiaman galley. I know that because I went and walked around for 2 days a 16th century East Indiaman galleon. They've rebuilt, so the shipwreck I was telling you about earlier that inspired all of this, that ship has been rebuilt by those crazy Dutch people in the Netherlands in a port called Lelystad. And they rebuilt it using original construction methods and original materials. It's really, really cool. And if we're ever allowed to go anywhere ever again, I recommend you go and see it because it's so awesome. And it's now a floating museum. And I spent 2 days there just walking around it and peering in all the nooks and crannies and chatting to the volunteers and working out how this thing sailed. Because you wouldn't, of course you would recognize it as a ship. It's got sails and it's got masts. It doesn't have a wheel. It doesn't, the navigation systems, as we would even understand them from like classic galleons that we saw in pirate movies, aren't there. So it took a lot of figuring out and a lot of questions to work out how I could set a novel on it, because I really wanted the novel to be on this ship. I wanted the ship to be a character. I wanted it to play into the resolution. I wanted it to be important, not just a backdrop. And I had to figure out what all the bits did in order to formulate a plot around it. So it's very historically accurate. The only things that aren't historically accurate are I put passenger cabins into it, and they would not have been there. I put passenger cabins on because I needed spaces for secrets to exist, and secrets could not have existed on the ship, or at least it would have been very, very difficult. There would have been 300 people on one of these ships, which means there's eyes and ears on almost every plank of wood and every nail. It would be very hard to have a secret unless you were a senior officer. So I've put passenger cabins into it so that my people can have private meetings and develop secrets and have plans and things, because you need those in a murder mystery. The cargo hold is much bigger than it would have been on the ship, and it still would have been massive, but my cargo hold, for reasons that I hope you will realize in the book, is an abyss. Basically, it's the dark heart of the ship. It's where a lot of the terrible things happen, and I had to make that bigger and more terrifying, so that's kind of like a bit larger than it would have been. What else? In terms of historical accuracies, I have a bit at the end of the book which I shall go to now, just because I want to show you, and it is called Sorry, I'm flicking through. Oh, I was going to do a reading for you. I'm so sorry. I appear to have forgotten. I'm an idiot. Oh, it's not in this one. Really weird. Sorry. There's a note at the back of the book, and it's called An Apology to History and Boats. And that is because I did a lot of historical research. I spent a lot of time crawling around the boat. I spent a lot of time in the library reading through journals of people who were on these boats and passengers on these boats in this time period, trying to get a handle on how all this would have worked and what the situation would have been. And then I kind of tossed a lot of it away. So I kept some phrases, because I hate when I'm reading a historical novel and it just tosses in 10 terms that you couldn't possibly understand without an index at the back of the book. I hate doing that. So I didn't want to do it. So wherever I could, I don't want to break up the flow of my novel, because there's a word in there that you just got no chance of understanding. So unless I can explain it in the context around the word, I didn't use it. So the boat sails according to the principles of how the boat would have sailed in this period, but I just don't go into them. I tossed a lot of it away. It's all in the background. It comes up in some conversations, but only where I can elegantly and simply put it in. So there's no 2 pages of Wikipedia. There's no Patrick O'Brien in this book. I just want to put that out there, because I know some people have come looking for Patrick O'Brien, and I am not that dude. I am not that Hilary Mantel. I am not writing a historical fiction book. I'm not writing a boat book. I'm writing a murder mystery that is on a boat. But hopefully I've been as honest and true to those genres as I possibly can. Would you please share how your first work came to be published? Curious if publishers recognised how original it was, or was it a long slog? No, actually, I was quite lucky. I'm sorry, I'm just realised that we're drawing on for time, so just come on and kick me off when it's time for me to be kicked off. I was quite lucky. Seven Deaths. If anybody's not come across it, it's an Agatha Christie style murder mystery with all that stuff, all that classical murder mystery stuff that you get in one of all those tropes, the upper class guest with secrets, the impossible murder, the heiress, all the rest of it. But it's set in a body hopping, time traveling mansion. So it's every time my protagonist fails to solve the mystery, he wakes up again and the day starts over, but he's in the body of a different guest in the house, and he keeps bumping into future hims and past hims, and they don't always all want the same thing. So it's a very strange take on it. I was worried when I finished that novel that it was too complex. I was very worried that nobody would take it on. I got really lucky. I sent it to 5 agents. One agent asked me, I got 3 requests for a full read. One of the agents I actually met with didn't get the book at all and wanted to make it a straight up Agatha Christie novel and take away all the sci-fi because she didn't think it would sell. So obviously I didn't go with her. The second agent I talked to got it completely. He's my agent now. He's a good dude. And he set me on the path. And then he'd had a conversation 2 weeks earlier with a publisher who'd been lamenting that at that period, and because obviously I'm British, this is not a fake accent. I'm not just doing this for your, to make you laugh. He'd been talking to a British publisher who'd been lamenting the fact that all the books and the manuscripts and the submissions she were getting were the same type. They were all the woman on, the woman in, a train, in a window, on a horse. I don't know, whatever it was, but they all felt the same to when she wanted something radically different, and she wanted something with an incredibly different bent. And all of a sudden this landed on his desk. We took it to her and she just went for it. So I was very lucky and very privileged that I had this immediate path through. but then I was terrified that it wouldn't sell. I was terrified that it wouldn't. So there's always, as an author, especially a debut author, there's always that worry about the next step, the next hurdle, the next thing to trip you up. You're never you're never satisfied. You get an agent, you're not satisfied. You get a publisher, you're not satisfied. You sell a few copies, you win an award, you're never satisfied. So yeah, I'm still living that, sadly. Second book. Let's see. Jay must have Stuart visiting North Carolina. I think his family would love our lovely team. We could hear these adventures in person. That sounds amazing. I would love to come out one day. Hopefully everything will settle down quite soon and we can all just get on with having fun.
We really would love to have you in North Carolina when people are allowed to travel and be around each other again. So I've received several texts and emails while you're talking telling me that we have to get you here. So everyone really enjoyed your talk, and I did as well. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I want to go back and read the book all over again. So, and I have not read Evelyn Hardcastle, but I just bought it, so I'm taking it home to read it. So, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on a really fabulous book. This is
thank you.
Just amazing. It's one of my favorites of the year, and I've been telling everybody to read it. It's so great. I loved every second of it. I can't praise it enough. So thank you so much. We hope that you and your family stay well in London, and maybe we'll all get through this crazy year and be able to maybe get you over here for the paperback release next year.
I would love that so much. I'd love to meet you all in person. And the same thing to you. Please all stay safe so we can all, have a beer or a tea very, very soon. And thank you for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me on. It's been great. And sorry about the headphone snafu.
That's pretty much par for the course these days with virtual events. So no worries. Thank you so much. Have a good night. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. We'll hopefully see you all soon.
Thanks, guys. Have a nice night. Thank you for coming.